In boardrooms across the world, leaders are asking new kind of question. If organizations become AI first, does my leadership become last? We are automating decisions, scaling touch points, and compressing time to value. Yet employees still leave because they don't feel seen. Customers still crunch because they feel heard, but future leaders still doubt themselves despite all the dashboards. The tension is real. Can empathy scale at same speed as our technology, or does one always sacrifice the other? With this, we would like to run a small video about power of knowing form before we dive into the topic. Our guest today has spent years inside that tension. Charles is a highly impact executive coach who works with senior leaders and the next generation CXOs around the world, helping them to turn awareness into strategic advantage. His mantra is my ceiling is the next generation's floor. Captures his life work building leaders who are both deeply human and relentlessly future ready. Let's welcome Charles to our podcast and dive into the topic. Hi, Charles. Welcome to our show. How are you today?
I'm well, Prem. Thank you so much for having me back. It's great to be here. Thank you.
A small intro about yourself, Charles.
I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, and I have lived in Hong Kong for almost 30 years. I started my career as an entrepreneur. I spent about 30 years in corporate HR in various HR roles. My original background in human resources was in learning and development and organizational development. Then I moved into generalist roles with a variety of big companies like Juniper and Citrix. And now I'm back into an entrepreneurial mode as executive and leadership coach and a consultant.
Thank you for that intro, Charles. Let's dive into the topic. Now, my first pointer that I want to understand is when leaders say we want empathetic AI, a powered organization, what does that actually mean beyond slogans?
Yeah, that's a great question. Algorithmic empathy versus human empathy. And I think that AI can simulate aspects of empathy by recognizing patterns in data, such as tone of voice or facial expressions, and responding accordingly. And this is sometimes called algorithmic empathy. But AI lacks the genuine understanding, the genuine consciousness, and shared human experience that defines true empathy. And thus, AI can support, but not replace, the authentic, empathetic, emotional connection.
Charles, you're there?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, if you were sitting at the global CXO in 2026, and how would you help them define empathy in a way that's measurable, coachable, stable, scalable across regions and cultures?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Prem. And the way I would do that is I would say to the CXOs that what they need to do is need to make empathy measurable. They would need to start by defining observable behaviors and break empathy down into really specific pinpointed behaviors, such as active listening, asking open-ended questions, following up on personal or professional concerns an employees have. For example, asking, what's the most important thing for me to know about you right now? And that's a concrete behavior that can be tracked. And they can also use sentiment analysis and feedback tools that can leverage AIs to analyze communication, emails, meetings, feedback, to capture notes, track trends about employee engagement and well-being. And these tools can provide data on how empathetic behaviors occur and their impact on team morale. And then, of course, we have the traditional survey and 360 feedback, which can get very, very creative when being used when being clubbed together with AI. And then the other thing I would say is to make empathy coachable. So spend time training your staff on empathy. Create training programs that teach empathy. I've run a number of surveys in the last couple of years around empathetic leadership and how much companies actually invest in empathetic leadership. And while a lot of them say that they would advocate they're practicing empathetic leadership, they're actually not training it in any way. And that's one of the things that I would say is really, really critical. And then also scaling it across organizations, across regions, across cultures, looking at how empathy can be expressed differently in different cultures. So empathy in the United States, empathy in Canada will be different than empathy in India or Japan or China, for example. And so it's important to really be embracing what empathy means for these local leaders to adapt to definitions and behaviors. But again, there will be some global standards with local flexibility. So that would be my answer to the CXOs if I had the opportunity to talk to them about it.
Charles, I see a crack on the voice. Is that possible that you can move from the headphones and have a discussion there, Charles? Is that okay?
The headphones is the best way for me to get you the voice. Is it really cracking up a lot?
Yeah, it is cracking out.
Oh, it's strange, because you're not cracking up when I hear you. Are you getting feedback from the audience that it's cracking up?
It was cracking, now it is better.
Okay, maybe I need to speak a little slower.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's what is one mind shift every leader must make to stop treating empathy as a soft and start treating it as a strategic system.
Yeah, so every leader, they need to shift viewing empathy as intangible and move it to something that's measurable, that's a coachable skill, that directly drives organizational performance and resilience. And a lot of things that a lot of people relate to empathy as being weakness. They think that if you're an empathetic leader, that you're actually a weak leader. And that's not at all true. That's just not the case. Empathetic leaders can be firm leaders. They can be empathetic. They can be understanding. They can be compassionate. They can be sympathetic, while at the same time being firm leaders about what they stand for and what needs to get accomplished. But by embedding empathy into leadership systems, using data feedback and structured development, it becomes a core strategic asset rather than a soft extra.
Just from your vantage point, can empathy truly scale with AI, and are we confusing personal automation with human connection?
I think empathy definitely can scale with AI. In fact, AI can be a huge asset for leaders to develop empathetic skills. And one of the things that I want to just speak to for a moment is some of the statistics around empathy. So a 2024 State of Workplace Empathy Report found that many CEOs, about 63%, and 42% of employees struggle to show empathy. And the reason they struggle to show empathy is because they say that they're too busy and that's the barrier, which seems ridiculous. And other studies indicate a high demand for empathy from leadership, with employees in empathetic workplaces being 4 times more likely to stay long term and 8 times more likely to be highly engaged. But meanwhile, Harvard did a survey where 80% of CEOs in the Harvard study viewed empathy as a key success criteria, but only 40 to 49% of leaders globally were perceived as demonstrating it effectively. And so obviously what we can see here is a disconnect between the desire to be an empathetic leadership and the actuality, the reality of practicing empathetic leadership. And this is one of the ways where AI can really help. If someone is getting feedback that they're not an empathetic leader, then they can actually go into AI and they can use AI as a way to learn some of the skills to become a more empathetic leader. Now, that's not going to replace the human connection. If they're only going through the motions in a conversation in an empathetic conversation, then that's not going to be helpful. But if they really are committed to becoming an empathetic leader, then AI can be a fantastic resource to help people develop those empathetic skills. And that's where I think the ability to have AI and empathy scale together is really a possibility.
I have a message from Leslie saying that there is a crackle that is happening from your side. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, not sure where that's coming from because I've got everything configured as best as it can be
And
here.
now it is clear. I think you need to talk slow. I think I am not sure
Okay.
whether. Okay, let's see that. Now, what is one test a leader can use tomorrow to know if their AI use is deepening trust or quietly eroding it?
Yeah, so one thing a leader can do to understand if AI is deepening trust or if it's eroding it is the leader can ask their team directly for feedback. And this is what we call perspective taking. And they can ask how AI driven processes make them feel. Do they experience greater understanding, greater support, greater transparency, or do they sense increased surveillance and detachment? And if employees report that AI tools help their voices be heard and lead to more meaningful human interactions, then trust is likely to deepen and they won't feel monitored. The employees won't feel less valued. They'll feel that trust is being built up and not diminished. So one of the things, when you were having empathetic conversations, one of the ways, for example, a very practical way that leaders and managers can use AI is by having a very simple tool such as an AI note taker to keep track of those notes. And for example, if you look at performance management and back to the earlier statistic about employees and leaders saying they're too busy, AI note takers can remove a lot of the busyness out of a really good, meaningful career conversation and capture the notes of that career conversation and then get those notes captured in whatever system the organization is using for performance management. Whereas beforehand, a manager or a leader might have to spend hours writing down notes, which could be very laborious, and then one could understand that they might feel too busy. But it doesn't have to be that way. But the number one thing leaders can do is ask their employees, and that's what I would call perspective taking, getting feedback.
What you are saying in this one is AI can help leaders do better. Where is one tool that you're talking about? AI notes taker is one thing that you're talking about, where the summarization of a discussion can be brought immediately, where rather than have to type out the minutes of meeting and who said what stakeholder gave what kind of an information. And those are the challenges that you see AI can be an enabler, is what you're saying, right? Now,
Exactly.
uh, how do we see how do we see AI genuinely enhancing empathy? For example, in feedback loops, in coaching insights, or well being signals versus simulating it.
Yeah. So I think that AI can genuinely enhance empathy by providing real real-time feedback loops. And the other thing that AI is very good at, if you're using an advanced AI tool, is sentiment analysis during conversations, which can offer a manager and a leader insights into tailoring their approach to individual needs. So particularly if you're managing or leading remotely or having conversations where employees are working from home, the sentiment analysis can be very, very effective to provide leaders and managers with feedback on how empathetic they're being, because you can see how the energy and the sentiment of a conversation is increasing or decreasing. And this will also surface well-being signals for managers across teams if you're using this data, these tools in aggregate, and it can alert leaders to shifts in morale or shifts in engagement that might otherwise go unnoticed. And these applications can empower leaders to act more empathetically rather than just simulating empathetic responses. They can get really valuable data on how employees, their staff, their teams are feeling.
What you are saying is, at the AI can't take care of people. It can only reveal what you are not, is what you are saying in as many words, because it's a tool or a enabler that is there for us to build upon, right? So with what does empathic leadership look like at the board level, at the CXO level, especially when tough calls on cost, headcount, automation are on the top of the table?
Yeah, great question, because we all know that at the board level and at the exco level, leaders need to make difficult decisions. Even empathetic leaders need to make difficult decisions, such as cost reductions, headcount changes, or even automation by introducing AI workflows or any kind of workflows in an ERP system or an HR transformation system. And I think what's important for what empathetic leadership looks like in those types of situations is that leaders, the CXOs, are prioritizing transparent, open communication and genuine concern for those individuals who are affected. So traditionally, it's very easy for individuals at that level to look at the number on a spreadsheet and think, okay, that's a number, that's a head count, but it's actually a human being and their lives are impacted. And leaders can demonstrate empathy by clearly explaining the rationale behind some of the tough decisions and tough choices that they have to make, and actively listening to concerns, making sure that as many stakeholders as possible are represented, and providing support and resources for those employees who are impacted. And this also, they can also seek ways to mitigate negative effects, such as offering retraining or redeployment opportunities, and ensuring that decisions are aligned with the organizational values and long-term well-being. So ultimately, from the top, empathetic leadership balances business imperatives with a commitment to being fair, to treating people with dignity, and treating employees with trust.
Coming to that point, how can boards integrate empathy into governance without compromising on accountability, compliance, and stakeholder expectations, Charles?
Yeah, great question, Prem. Thanks for that. I think it comes back to, I'll maybe just expand on what I said a minute ago, and that is that the boards need to really make sure that all stakeholder perspectives are taken into consideration in the decision-making process. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the decision is going to be different, but it might mean that they're talking to stakeholders about how those stakeholders are going to be impacted, and regularly soliciting employee and community feedback and considering the social impact alongside the social impact of a decision alongside the financial outcomes that they're trying to achieve. And this approach would enhance accountability. It enhances compliance by ensuring the policies are being followed both ethically and in a transparent way, and communicated in a transparent way, while still meeting the stakeholders and the shareholders' expectations for sustainable, responsible growth for the organization. So that's how I think that empathy could be integrated into governance without compromising overall accountability.
I think what you're saying is we should lean into the executive lens, talk about empathy as a form of risk intelligence, and understand the impact on how people, culture, and brand goes in, right? So that's what you're trying to say. And if that is a pointer, if you had 60 seconds with a global board, what would you say to them about empathy as it is a risk control or not a risk?
So I would say that lack of empathy is a risk. So empathy isn't a risk. It's a critical risk control lever, and it can help boards anticipate issues and diffuse conflict and build trust before problems escalate. And by embedding empathy into governance, boards can spot early warning signs of disengagement. They can spot warning signs of ethical lapses or reputational threats, or and that enables proactive responses to protect both people and performance. And in today's environment, empathetic leadership is not just good ethics. It's really smart risk management. So being an empathetic leader is definitely reduces risk for a board.
Just coming to for building or building leaders who design systems and rituals, how can the architect AI enabled workflows that bake empathy instead of bolting it?
Yeah, and how would you distinguish between baking and bolting? What would be the difference there, do you think? Before I answer that question.
Uh, so bolting is kind of fixed is what I feel, right? And when you talk about baking, I think you are going with the ingredient, you make it more better rather than fixing it to a structure, is what I think, Charles. So your take on it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think and helpful. Thank you. I think that leaders can architect AI-enabled workflows uh, where empathy is part of the design of the system, and empathetic behaviors are integral to daily processes, and they're not just afterthoughts. So a very simple example of that would be in one organization that I worked with, where it was part of regular career conversations and performance management conversations, was checking in with the employees about their well-being and how they were doing. And and when that organization trained managers on how to have those conversations, it was about how to have that conversation from an empathetic place, not as, okay, asking a question about well-being is a bolt-on. Asking a question about well-being is actually baked into the process. It's an important and integral part of the process. And embedding those types of mechanisms, like well-being check-ins, into personalized coaching prompts can be part of routine workflows. In fact, AI can remind managers. I mean, we know from the statistics I mentioned earlier that managers often complain that they're too busy to have these conversations. And one of the things that AI can do is it can remind managers to have these conversations in a variety of different ways. So really, leaders should ensure that AI tools are transparent, culturally adaptive, that they support, not replace human judgment and connection, that they support, not replace human intuition. But by making empathy part of the design principle, such as asking something really simple like a well-being question, organizations can create environments where technology and people come together in a very powerful way and reinforce a culture of care and understanding.
Great pointers there, Charles. Now, what is the recurring rhythm? One is to one ratios, town falls, coaching circles can be redesigned with AI to deepen understanding rather than collect the data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the power of, AI is not just, as you say, Prem, it's not just to collect the data. The power of the data is in the pattern recognition. And so, for example, if leaders, if in an organization there's an emerging well-being issue or there's an emerging morale issue, then AI will identify that pattern probably much earlier than and faster and in more real time than most data analytic tools would enable you to do once if you apply AI to that. So I would say pattern recognition is one of the key things for identifying. You're having those recurring rhythms, those one-to-ones, the town halls, the coaching circles, the career conversations. If you capture those and are able to integrate that data together, the power of AI is in recognizing the patterns and going, hey, heads up, everybody, we're seeing this pattern. This is something you might want to do. And a very easy example of that is in sentiment analysis. And some organizations are actually using sentiment analysis in their employee engagement tools, and they can see that sentiment is dropping down in aggregate. And I use sentiment analysis in my coaching, and when I'm coaching individuals, particularly if it's by Zoom or virtual contexts such as you and I are talking now, I don't have the sentiment analysis running now, but if I did, it would tell me when the energy is going up and down in the conversation. So that pattern recognition is super powerful, and that's how AI can really help deepen our understanding of data.
Got it, Charles. Now, what's one empathy ritual that any leader can implement in the next 7 days using only the tools they are already having? Because we cannot keep adding tools, right? So that is one pointer, and we see what can be the best use of what we have, right?
Yep, yep, absolutely. And this is a really great point that you make, Prem. A lot of people think that this whole AI revolution that we're going through is just giving people more work. And actually, if you're really effectively using AI, you actually create space for yourself to have more human conversations. And so before I actually come to answering your question about a ritual, let me give you an example of an individual that I worked with who was in charge of talent acquisition for a very large organization. And they were looking for ways to embed AI into the talent acquisition process. And a very simple thing that they did was started using AI as a way to capture notes on candidates. So that didn't replace the interview. It was a way of capturing the notes from the interview. And what that allowed the recruiters to do is to spend more time connecting with the candidates and less time writing down notes. Then afterwards, they had a summary of the notes from their interviews that they could review and check to make sure that it was accurate and it was an accurate reflection. And this saved a huge amount of time for the recruiters. And then the leader, the talent acquisition leader, then said, okay, I want you to use that extra time to be getting back to candidates. Because I think any HR professional will know that it's a universal global problem that candidates are sending out lots of resumes, they're going through lots of interviews, but they don't always get feedback. And sometimes they wait a very, very long time before hearing back from a company on the results of an interview or the results of a job application that they've submitted. And this talent acquisition leader directed his team to say, with this extra time, I want you to have more human connection with the candidates, and that would be a game changer for that organization. So there's an example of how technology can actually create space and create time instead of just being more to do. But to come specifically to your question about what's one ritual that a leader can implement in the next 7 days, I would say it would be a pulse check asking each team member a simple question, which might be different for each organization or each leader, but that could be a simple question such as, what's one thing that's on your mind this week? What's one thing that you need help with this week? And they can ask that question in a one-on-one. They can ask that question in a chat on Slack, for example. They can ask that question in meetings. Another great question that I love asking, and it comes to my point a couple minutes ago about what can we stop doing, is asking the question, with all these tools that we have now, what can we stop doing? Where can we create time for ourselves? And I remember years ago, I worked for an organization where we were producing 30 to 40 reports per month for various departments within the organization. And we asked ourselves, why are we writing all these reports? So we actually did some work and reduced those reports down to 3 to 4 reports, so that some of the reports contained confidential information and some of the reports didn't. So we just split up and managed to find 4 common denominator reports that could be sent out to the stakeholders, and that created a huge amount of time and space for both the HR team and for the finance team. So by actively listening and following up on these types of questions, leaders can demonstrate genuine care and create a habit of empathy using tools that are already at their disposal. Just a simple question such as, what's one thing on your mind this week? What's something you think we could stop doing? What's something I need to know about you that I don't already know? And that would be a great ritual that leaders can do. There's a study that happened in the US within the last year, and the study compared multi-million dollar well-being programs with managers having meaningful career conversations that included well-being questions. And what they found was that uh, that basically they found that career conversations that included well-being conversations, so empathetic career conversations, had a more impact on employee well-being than multi-million dollar well-being programs. So that really says something about the power of the empathy and empathetic leadership.
Charles, what you are saying is one step where you don't need an automation to be done, and what works and what does not work is one pointer that you can look immediately and start working on it. So I'll take one example where we had in one of the organizations while I was consulting, we found a senior leader leaving, and a new leader had to come in and take. So when he came in and he asked, how do you take care of people who have been facing a new leader who is not known to them very well? So the first question that he asked is, what works, let's keep it. What's not working, let's research on it. So when that message was given to the team felt confident, and they felt, yes, if something is working, he wants to improve that in a sense, and what is not working, let's relook at what is that it is causing or why it is not working. So they gave him a kind of, the team gets a kind of assurance that he's backing them, right? So that is one thing that you can take immediately, is what I understood. And the builder lens there, where we talk about saying these are the practical tools that we can use, right? Not theory.
Yes.
We don't want to get into the theory side. So how AI can summarize at times or highlight some things. And when we, as you are saying, when you get into meetings, these note takers are a real time savers today, if you really look at, because every pointer cannot be taken as a notes, but when you get this notes taken by this, and when you get a summarization, it tells you who asked what, who told this, and how it is to be mapped and who it has to be mapped out. And that's the kind of summary that it gives as a tool, is what I understand. And some of the tools that I've been using is the AI note taker, which is very promising, what I see when it comes
Yes.
to AI stuff. Now, coming to AI at the PL, profit and loss level, right? How do you connect empathy to hard business outcomes like revenue, retention, and time to market, Charles?
Yeah, great question. I think that it's important that at the P&L level, that leaders do not underestimate how much empathy drives hard business outcomes. And it does that by fostering employee engagement, high employee engagement, when it's directly linked to increased productivity or lower turnover or stronger customer relationships, for example. And when leaders practice empathy, employees feel valued and supported, and that leads to greater retention and greater discretionary effort, which accelerates project delivery and accelerates innovation and creates happier customers. So empathetic organizations can also build trust with customers that result in higher satisfaction, more loyalty, and ultimately revenue growth. So by embedding empathy into leadership and workflows, that translates into measurable gains across revenues. So absolutely, empathy is connected to hard business outcomes, but this is sometimes lost with leaders. Sometimes leaders focus too much on the metrics and not enough on what are the drivers behind the metrics, such as employee engagement and employee attrition.
Got that pointer, Charles. What are some patterns you have seen where emotional intelligence leaders directly moved their needle on growth, especially in sales, customer success, and innovation teams?
Yeah, one thing is, first of all, emotional intelligent leaders will practice empathetic conversations, and they will recognize that empathetic conversations does not mean they're a weak leader. They can be a firm leader while having empathetic conversations. And what they're doing is, at the same time, is they're consistently driving growth by creating environments where team members feel psychologically safe, and they're safe to share ideas. They feel safe to take risks and to collaborate openly, and that fuels innovation and problem solving. So to come back to your example about a new leader starting and that new leader saying, well, we're going to look at what works and we're going to maintain what works and we're going to look at what doesn't work and we're going to look at how we can get rid of what doesn't work. If you have a psychologically safe environment, then the employees will feel safe to share the ideas and take risks sharing ideas about what works and what doesn't work. And so a really highly effective, emotionally intelligent leader will be able to have those kinds of conversations. And in sales and customer success teams, leaders can build authentic relationships with clients by being transparent. Lots of times leaders get too focused on just driving for the sale, and they forget about a customer's needs. When they ultimately they might get the sale in the short term, but in the long term, they're going to get lower conversion rates and they're going to get weaker customer satisfaction and weaker loyalty. So these patterns show that when leaders prioritize empathy and emotional intelligence, teams outperform and customers are happier, and that leads to growth metrics down the road.
I think what you're saying is very clear in terms of you should translate emotional intelligence into outcome language, win rates, and renewal rates. I think time to deals, right. To some of the innovation thought process is what you are trying to say. Now, the finance team is always looking at a spreadsheet, right? So it is always the numbers that they talk. If a CFO asked you to show how empathy on a spreadsheet, and how would you answer that?
Yeah, I actually have an example of that, and I would point to metrics like employee retention rates,
Hmm.
customer satisfaction scores, and the speed of project delivery, all of which improve when empathy is embedded into leadership and into cultures. And these numbers translate directly into reduced hiring costs, higher lifetime customer value, faster time to market, and it makes empathy a tangible driver of financial performance. And many years ago, I worked in an organization that had very, very high attrition. And one of the first things that I did when I went into that organization is I looked deeply at their attrition statistics and what was the trending attrition statistics, I even broke it down to who was leaving, and there was a high incidence of short-term employees leaving. So longer-term employees were staying, but short-term employees who'd only been there 6, 12, 18 months were actually leaving. And that meant that there was a constant churn that leaders felt they were never really getting on top of attrition. And I remember my first QBR, I said to the leadership team, if things don't change in the next 9 months, you are going to lose 93 employees. And 9 months later, we had a QBR, and I said to them, as of today, since I've started in this organization, you've lost 93 employees. Now, for that organization, 93 were a lot of staff, and there may be people listening that have thousands of employees.
Yeah.
So you can easily say 930 employees or 9,300 employees. But when I actually show them the first QBR slide and the updated QBR slide, that was when they stopped dead in their tracks and they realized that empathy was deeply missing in the culture, and they started to affect change.
Oh, very important point to see. What I think is, if empathy does not show up in your numbers, it shows up in your losses at least, right? So that's
Yes.
where what we are talking about. Now, your line, my ceiling is the next generation floor, is powerful. But what does that look like in practice when you coach emerging CXOs?
Yeah, in practice, that looks like coaching emerging CXOs with a mindset of equipping them to surpass today's leadership standards and today's leadership challenges. And if you look around the world, and I'm not singling out any particular country, we all know right now that the United States is definitely in the media a lot, but the United States is not alone in having lots and lots of issues. There's countries all over the world that are dealing with conflict. We have this situation in Europe. We have the situation in the Middle East. We have lots of examples of where there's conflict. And really, what being a next generation leader means, and my ceiling being the next generation's floor, is encouraging and empowering CXOs and leaders to surpass today's leadership standards and challenges, and focus on building and helping the next generation to become better at emotional intelligence, to become better at digital fluency, and to create a global perspective where they can lead with greater empathy and greater impact, greater agility, and increased impact than their predecessors. And I one of the ways this is sometimes described is the term regenerative leadership, which means you always leave people better than their last interaction. Sometimes, to give a really simple example, a restaurant can be a wonderful, fantastic restaurant, but a restaurant is still only as good as the last interaction that it has with its last customer going out the door. And if a customer has a terrible experience at a restaurant, that restaurant's dealing with that terrible experience. And statistics will tell you that when customers have bad experiences, they tell 10 people. You rarely get people raving about a positive experience, although today in social media you do have more gratitude emerging up. But generally, people are complainers, and when they have a bad customer service experience, they will tell 10 people about that bad experience. So what being a next generation leader, a regenerative leader, means is helping the emerging leaders to be better than themselves. We rise by lifting others, and this involves encouraging people to learn from current best practices, but also to innovate, to question their assumptions, to set new benchmarks for inclusive, ethical, high-performing, and empathetic leadership. And ultimately, it's about ensuring that what's considered exceptional today becomes a baseline for tomorrow's leaders.
Oh, you're very important, because uh, you take anything, whether it is revenues, whether it is customer satisfaction, whether it is compliance. Yesterday's results are considered as the benchmark, because that's the achievement that we have done, and the future benchmarking is going to be the next advancement that we do, right? So that is an important point. What is the most common uh, inner block you see in high potential leaders when they face AI driven challenge change and expectations overloaded? Because we are talking AI everywhere today,
Yeah.
right? So it is not only with notes taking. We are talking about automation of threat intelligence, the automation of service desk, customer success, customer service, many places where AI is getting used. Now, how do you look at where AI is normal, where it is change these leaders face, right?
Yeah. What I see as big blocks for high potential leaders facing AI is, first of all, there's expectation overload, and there's a fear of losing relevance or control. And there's also an element of self doubt about their ability to adapt quickly enough. And one of the things we're learning about AI is that when you start looking at AI impacting workflows, it can be a lot of heavy lifting. It can be as difficult as installing an ERP, which your listeners will be well aware. Uh, installing an ERP or going through any kind of HR digital transformation requires a lot of heavy lifting and requires a lot of work. And so there's this fear of overload. And leaders may also struggle with perfectionism. They may feel pressure to master both the human and the technological skills simultaneously, which can lead to hesitation or burnout if not addressed. And so I think that those are the big inner blocks that I see. Another inner block that I see is that sometimes leaders come in to work with me, and they're, for lack of a better word, their nervous system is in a high state of alert. They're in a high state of nervousness. They're in a high state of, I don't really want to say anxiety, but for lack of a better word, they're in a high state of being anxious. Not necessarily, they're not suffering from anxiety the way a counselor might suggest, but they're suffering from a high state of stress. And until they are actually able to, step back and calm down, then it's very difficult to work with them. And sometimes the first thing I need to do with a leader is get them to self-regulate a little bit in order for them to manage their concerns around losing control or self-doubt or perfectionism and that kind of thing.
No, you're right, because we are overwhelmed with what the way AI is getting added everywhere and anywhere, right? So I think that builds up the stress, and that's where I think you see a lot of change happening there. Now, what is now if we are looking at CXO or tomorrow are listening, what one identity shift they must make now to lead in a world where AI is normal but humanity is rare, right? So, how do you take this, Charles?
Yeah, I would say that for the future CXOs who are listening, or today's CXOs who are listening, I would say that I would mentor them. I wouldn't tell them, but I would mentor them to shift from seeing themselves as sole experts or sole decision makers to become facilitators of collective intelligence. And they can blend AI's analytical power that we've talked about today with unique human qualities like empathy, ethics, and intuition. Because AI, at the end of the day, as much as it can provide you with sentiment and provide you with pattern recognition, and it can help you get skills to become a more empathetic leader, it won't replace intuition, and it won't necessarily replace ethics judgment. So embracing this identity means leading with humility, leading with curiosity, and ensuring that technology amplifies humanity rather than replaces it. And that mindset will set CXOs apart in a world where AI is ubiquitous, but genuine human leadership is increasingly valuable. Now, one of the things that it was said 10, 20 years ago in business schools is that the soft skills like communication and creativity, curiosity were important. But nowadays, they're so important people are saying these are now the new hard skills. Communication
Yeah.
is a new hard skill.
No, I completely agree with you saying that. See, I also take one pointer here, Charles, is that um, if your growth ends with you, I think you have not started or never been a leader really who has started, is what I take as when we look at uh, growth being stagnant after you leave, right? So I think you need to build the next level of leadership, whether it is technology, whether it is people, is what I get from what I see here. Now, how should leaders handle hardest conversation under, say, some of the performance, underperformance, restructuring feedback, and when teams are in hybrid global, surrounded with so many AI tools? How do you look at this, Charles?
Yeah, I think it's traditionally people are going to think that the way to approach those tough conversations is by being a tough leader. And that's not the way to approach these hard conversations like underperformance or restructuring or providing critical feedback. Leaders need to approach these conversations with heightened intentionality and heightened sensitivity, heightened empathy, and heightened clarity, especially when they're dealing with hybrid teams that might be working from home or global teams that are spread out around the world. So they need to ensure that communication is personal, that it's culturally sensitive, and that they use technology to gather insights and context and deliver messages in a way that honors an individual's dignity and the emotional realities that an individual is in. And uh, one of the things that we're seeing a lot globally in the coming out of the pandemic, and I know it's many years now since the pandemic, but we're still seeing a lot of conflict in the world and a lot of uncertainty. People are unsure about geopolitical issues. They're unsure about the economy. You, you have this term happening in the global workforce called no hire, no fire. So it is true that companies are laying off employees, and one of the big tech companies just announced yesterday that they were laying off, I think, about 16,000 employees. So they're making a strategic decision to cost cut in that particular area. But other than those sort of strategic decisions, a lot of companies are in a no hire, no fire situation, which can be very, very frustrating for candidates who are looking for jobs. And so the way to handle these hard conversations is by asking empathetic questions. So when you have, let's say, for example, you have a conflict between two employees, and maybe one employee lost their mind and they got angry and they got super emotional, and the second employee was a big victim of the situation, and they're crying and they're in tears and they think they're being bullied. Well, obviously, you would look after the employee that is upset and is the victim of the situation, and but you don't go and you don't club the person that lost their mind. You don't club the person that got angry. You sit down with them and you say, "Are you okay? What's happening? What's going on? What caused you to act that way?" So increasingly, HR professionals are looking at these conversations as well-being issues. That it's not necessarily that this person has a propensity to be like that, and maybe they are, but it's probably something that's triggered them to act in that particular way. And you need to offer support. You need to have a human side interaction and have clear next steps and clear expectations on what's allowed and what's not allowed. And it can be clear you can't treat an employee like that and have a firm, empathetic conversation and create expectations. But it doesn't mean that you bludgeon them to death because they lost their cool. You just are clear on what your expectations are.
Charles, but what I want to understand also, the next pointer is, should principles be guided whether a conversation is done in person or video through a digital system, especially across cross cultures? Because today we don't work out of one region, one zone, right? So how do you take this, Charles?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, Prem, what a lot of people don't know about me is I'm currently doing some doctoral research where I'm comparing the effectiveness of virtual versus in-person coaching from the coaches and the client's perspectives, and if age is a determinant in that. So stay tuned for the results of that research, which will be coming out later in 2026. But I would say that when it comes to difficult conversations and whether they should be done in person or video, this is when the emotionally intelligent leader that you were talking about earlier makes a choice of what's the best medium. So the the medium should be guided by the sensitivity and the complexity of the conversation. And another thing that's important is the cultural norms regarding directness and hierarchy and any need for emotional nuance. So, for example, when I worked at a large tech company that was now has thousands of employees in Bangalore, but in the beginning they had 16. So if they're listening, they know who they are. But they started with 16 employees in Bangalore, and most of the hiring decisions were made out of the United States as that tech company scaled. And one of the things that we did, all those conversations were happening by video conference. And one of the things we did is we looked at the cross-cultural norms around having a conversation. For example, typically we were hiring a lot of very junior engineers that might be freshers with only 3, 4, or 5 years experience, but the people interviewing them had 20 years experience in many different tech companies. And so we trained the individuals who were candidates or promotable employees on how to be comfortable and how to be genuinely assertive in a video conference scenario. But we also trained the US hiring managers on what they could do to embrace and kind of come down to the same level as the engineers and in Bangalore, and not make them feel quite so intimidated because the person interviewing them had so many years of experience. So the choice of, sometimes you don't have a choice of the medium. In that case, you need to take into consideration how you can adjust. But if you do have a choice of medium, then the choice of medium should be guided by the sensitivity and the complexity of the situation.
Truly said, because what we see is today we work in a global arena where hiring is happening for a different location, and the hiring is taken from a different location altogether, because it is not restricted to have people interviewed at various regions, various geographies, is what we get to know. What is one sentence leaders should stop using through in tough conversations, and what should they say instead of, right? Any specific pointers that you have in mind, Charles?
Yeah, one expression that I sometimes hear leaders say is, "It's not personal, it's business." And I think leaders should stop saying that, because for an employee it is personal. And when you say it's not personal, it's business, you're actually taking the human connection and the empathetic connection out of the equation. And another thing that I had another idea. It's lost on me, from maybe it'll come back to me in a minute. But really, when people say things like it's just business, it's not personal, it diminishes the real emotions and the impact of those involved. And instead, they should be expressing how they understand that a decision affects an individual personally, and they want to talk them through what it means for them and how they can support them moving forward, and how they can help them to finish well if someone's being exited from an organization. And this shift acknowledges the human side of tough decisions and opens the door for empathy and for support and honest dialogue, even in challenging circumstances.
Charles, I think what we are saying is hard conversations don't break trust. They, how you avoid them does, right? So
Yes.
it is more important that you make conversations that does not ruin the trust that you have with a leader, is what I understand, right? Now, Charles, with that we are on top of the hour, and I would like to take a summary on what we've discussed over the last 45 to 50 minutes. Empathy is strategic system, not a personal trait, is what we have taken the first step, and AI can either amplify it or turn it into a threat. It depends on how you use, because when you look at AI is being used even by the threat handlers, and we are trying to protect it using AI. So it's a double-edged sword that we can look at, because it depends on how the tool is getting used by any person, right? That's the first point. Executive, builder, and business lenses are must align to. So empathy shows up in governance, daily rituals, and profit and loss outcomes also is what we are taking as a next step. AI is a mirror, as what we said earlier now, and not a substitute for leadership, because most of the people feel that AI is going to replace them. So AI is not going to replace them. It's an enabler, is what we are talking in. It reveals patterns. It gives you details of how leaders are acting, but leaders must choose how to respond also, is one thing that we are talking about. Trust scales through patterns, not through posters, right? Consistent behaviors, clear communication, courageous conversations are very, very important. And in what we are talking about, the can empathy scale with AI, what 2026 leaders must rethink now is leaders edge is not chosen between empathy and efficiency, but designed organizations that technology multiplies humanity, is what we wanted to take about. And Charles, any final comments that you want to put, or a final thought you want to have before we conclude, Charles?
Well, I would just remind people that we rise by lifting others, and by practice, one of the best ways to lift others is to practice empathetic leaders and be a regenerative leader. Always leave people better than the last interaction. Regularly practice self-reflection. Use AI-generated feedback if you can. Schedule consistent pulse checks. Invest in personal time learning about emerging technologies and about learning to become a more empathetic leader. And invest time in those conversations, the forums, the town halls, the one-on-ones, and all
Yeah.
that will facilitate better outcomes for individuals and for organizations.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you for being here today, and it was great insights that I had with what we have done. Audience also, I think, would have got the same. Our next episode is on next week, and thank you for joining us. We have streamed this podcast across the LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Hope you have a chance to review, and it is there available for you to re-review as well. Charles, thank you for being here, and
Thank you for having
we
me.
would like to conclude our session. Thank you, Charles. Good
Thank
day.
you.